Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched Lilo and Stitch. Let's talk about it. So Lilo and Stitch is directed by Dean Fleischer Camp, who also directed Marcel the Shell with Shoes On. Yes, the very highly acclaimed animated film from a couple of years back. Now here he has been tasked with helming the latest in Disney's long line of live action remakes, the second of just this year, because of course back in March we got Disney's live action remake of Snow White, which ended up being a disaster. Which ended up imploding in on itself in ways that we have never before seen. But in the case of Lilo and Stitch, we do have a marked improvement, even though I do also have some thoughts, some feelings about some of the changes that were made in this live action remake. So if you guys want to hear more about my nuanced thoughts on this latest live action remake, then go ahead and keep on watching. But before we get into it, as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. Now without further ado guys, let's discuss, let's talk. So in case you don't know, in case you've been living under a rock for the last 23 years, Lilo and Stitch is the story of Lilo, who is a young 6-year-old Hawaiian girl who lives alone with her 18-year-old sister Nani. Now Nani is seeking to take full guardianship of Lilo after the death of their parents. But Lilo is a little bit boisterous, she's a little bit of a troublemaker, and so Nani really struggles to prove to the social workers that she is equipped and ready to take Lilo on as her guardian. Now whilst Nani has her hands full dealing with some very real and mature issues and responsibilities, Lilo also has her own concerns, because her acting out could be a symptom of a whole bunch of things, like for instance the fact that she just lost her parents, but also because she feels very lonely and very much like an outsider within her community. She doesn't seem to fit in with her classmates, and that gets her into a lot of trouble at times. And one of the greatest wishes that she has for herself is to have a true friend, someone that she can connect with on a deeper level, and someone that can be her number one bestie. She just feels so alone on that island, and that's what she wants more than anything else in the world. That is her wish upon a star, and that seems to be granted very quickly and abruptly when she stumbles across Stitch, who is a blue dog. Stitch, who is a blue ass dog, okay, who comes out of nowhere, but in reality he's not a dog at all. Of course, he is actually experiment 626, who managed to escape from a spaceship and found himself on Earth, specifically in Hawaii, where he could pretend to be a dog and be adopted by Lilo, so that he can hide out and run away from the agents who are seeking to bring him back to the Federation. So the two stumbling into each other is kismet for them both, as Lilo finds herself with a brand new bestie that she wished for, and Stitch finds himself with a cover a cover that he can use in order to run away from the agents that are chasing him down. But along the way, with all of the chaos and madness that ensues, you have this really beautiful story that develops of friendship and found family between Lilo and Stitch, and even Nani, even though she initially hates Stitch because he is literally chaos incarnate. But they all find one another to create this new family from the ashes of their old one. It ends up being this really beautiful story of these outcasts and these people who feel like outsiders in their community coming together to create this new family. Now, when it comes to this live action remake, the story here is very similar to the story of the original film. They didn't change too much, although there are some changes that they made. There are some changes that they made that are, listen, we'll talk about the negatives later on, but to start off with the good, I would say that the story really hits the emotional beats well. They really understand the most kind of prominent and important messages of the Lilo and Stitch story, particularly as it pertains to the relationship between Lilo and Stitch that develops, and they are able to deliver that really well in live action. I found it incredible and astonishing how well they were able to convey the friendship between Lilo and Stitch, considering the fact that Sydney, the young actress who portrays Lilo, is so young. Okay, and this is like her first ever live action performance, and she absolutely smashed it. She was the perfect Lilo, and she was so talented, particularly considering the fact that she was acting against literally nothing. She was acting against a tennis ball, because Stitch is not a real character. And speaking of Stitch, here you have Chris Saunders, the creator and voice behind this iconic character, returning for this role, and he absolutely smashed it as well. I mean, he already knows what to do on the mic, so that's no surprise, but him reprising this role after 23 years was pretty iconic. And the fact that they were able to convey the chemistry and the love between these two incredibly iconic characters was a triumph. But one of the things that has always made Lilo and Stitch stand out as characters in the Disney roster was the chaos that surrounds them. These two are equally as chaotic as each other, and I love the fact that that wasn't watered down for this live action remake. I mean, Lilo herself got up to so many shenanigans in the original film, so much so that some of them had to be deleted because Disney feared that real children would copy her, as was the case with the scene where she leapt into a dryer or a washing machine. Yeah, that had to be axed from the final cut. And here in this live action version, we get a really fun sequence where Lilo and Stitch are bonding over their shared appreciation for shenanigans. And I think, again, that helps build the rapport and the friendship between the two characters, but also makes them stand out as characters that love the drama. Like, they're here for the drama, they're so troublesome, and I would be hard pressed to think of many other Disney characters who are like that in nature. So good on them for leaning on that, because they understand that this is a key characteristic when it comes to these two characters. Now, even though Lilo and Stitch tend to fall into all kinds of trouble, they don't always intend to, because oftentimes Lilo's intention is to try and help Nani, who she has a typical sister relationship with. They bicker, they argue, they don't get along at times, but deep down they have a real love for one another, and Lilo really appreciates Nani. It's difficult for her to adapt, you know, her feelings towards Nani, considering that Nani is now stepping into the role of a guardian rather than just a sister. And there's even this really touching line that Lilo says when she's like, you know, I think I'm starting to love you as a mum too, which is just we will talk about the ending, okay? But that was really touching. That kind of meant everything to me, and so it just shows that she's really had to adapt with all of the changes in her life, not only losing her parents, but now having Nani play the role of mother and father in their stead. So even though there are times where Lilo and Stitch turn the whole of Hawaii upside down, just know that, you know, she wants the best for Nani. She's really trying to help, and she's even trying to teach Stitch to like not be as troublesome and like just be a little bit more demure, but it's just not in his DNA. He's literally created for destruction, so he struggles with being a regular pet. To me, one of the most kind of touching and heartfelt and mature elements of the Lilo and Stitch story has always been this very real struggle that Nani is facing as this super young girl. She's like 18, 19 years old, but all of a sudden she finds herself responsible for her younger sister. And it's very real in this story because she has to deal with assessments from the social worker who comes in and visits her home and analyzes everything that's going on in their space. And on top of the fact that she herself is still a teenager, she's still learning, and she doesn't have parents to raise her, now she has this added responsibility of having to prove to the local authorities that she's equipped to raise her sister. And again, that's a very unique aspect to the Lilo and Stitch story that we don't really see elsewhere in Disney's roster. And so that being translated to live action hits home even harder, because now you're looking at a real life kid, and her fate is in her older sister's hands. But listen, me acknowledging the presence of this storyline is not the same as me agreeing with its outcome, because here we get to one of the biggest issues that I had with this Lilo and Stitch remake, particularly from a story perspective. I hated that ending. I hated that ending. Let's discuss. So this live action remake has very few deviations from the original animated film, but this is a huge one, and that is that Lilo does not end up in the care of Nani, but rather she ends up being dumped onto her neighbor so that Nani can pursue her own life and her own career as a marine biologist. She heads over to the States, or rather to the inland states, because Hawaii is still in the US, so that she can do a degree in marine biology, which is a passion of hers. And it's presented as this perfect solution, this happily ever after for both of them, because Lilo ends up in the care of a responsible and caring neighbor who is featured heavily throughout the story in this live action version, and who seems like a good fit to take care of Lilo in Nani's absence. But this is propaganda that I am not falling for. This is propaganda that I am not falling for, because Lilo should have ended up in Nani's care. This was not an element of the story that they needed to change. They needed to have kept that exactly the same. And listen, I know that this is a very tricky subject, because I see both sides here. I definitely see both sides. Of course I care for Nani. Of course, in an ideal situation, I would want her to pursue her dreams and goals of becoming a marine biologist, going out there to do her degree so that she can make something of herself and her own life. But unfortunately, they're not in ideal circumstances. Their parents have passed away, and she seemingly is the only family member who can actually take care of her younger sister. And so I really appreciated the fact that you had this really unique character who stepped up to the plate in that position to take care of her younger sibling. And the fact that they ripped that out of the story, the fact that they have erased that very important element of the character of Nani, was really disgraceful to me, was really abhorrent to me personally. I felt like it was a very kind of girl boss, individualistic, capitalistic ending for this story that doesn't really fit with the Hawaiian values that this story is supposed to embody. Now, I'm not claiming to be an expert in Hawaiian culture or history whatsoever, but I know a collectivist society when I see one. I know a society that values family and the family unit when I see one, and abandoning those values in this version of the story felt very wrong to me as someone who is also from a collectivist society. There's definitely downsides when it comes to collectivism, and that is that kind of sacrifice of your own hopes and dreams, which again, I understand. I completely understand if they wanted that for the character of Nani. Like, I get it, I do. But her sister's 6 years old. Her sister's 6 years old, and unfortunately someone needed to make a sacrifice, and it needed to be the 18-year-old sister. I'm sorry, it's something that I would do as an older sister, and it's something that I always appreciated Nani did in the original story. So again, a huge mistake in changing that. I did not feel like it was a happily ever after. I felt really uneasy. I felt like it was a very selfish decision on Nani's part, and that scene where Lilo is in hospital and Nani isn't able to pay her hospital bill, and so she relinquishes guardianship of her sister to the state, made me physically I was like, what? First of all, America, you need free healthcare, get it together. Second of all, why would you do this to me? This is traumatizing me. It's not even traumatizing the kids in my screening. This is traumatizing me, because I understand the implications of this as a grown adult. I hated it. They needed to please, they need to go back to the drawing board, rewrite that scene and that ending, and then bring it back into theaters, because as it stands, nah, this is not okay. And listen, I mentioned not being an expert in Hawaiian culture and history, and that's completely true, but I would still say, to my defense, that one of the overarching themes and strongest messages of the Lilo and Stitch universe is Ohana means family. No. Ohana means family is just as iconic as Hakuna Matata from the Lion King universe. And so the fact that they went against that very core principle of the Lilo and Stitch story to reimagine this ending is also hugely problematic, because now that message has no weight to it, because Nani was very willing and very happy to abandon her sister so that she could pursue her own future devoid of any family connection. And no, her ability to hop in and out of her sister's bedroom using those portals is not an adequate replacement for being her guardian and helping to raise that little girl. So, whew, like I said, that was the biggest issue that I had with the live action Lilo and Stitch story. I just had to get that off my chest, guys, because that did not sit right with me whatsoever. And since we're already diving into the negatives of this remake, let's just continue down this path, shall we? Another negative that comes to mind was how they handled the characters of Pleakly and Jumba. And no, I'm not just talking about the fact that they removed Pleakly being a cross-dresser, although that's just so typical 2025 afraid of woke Disney nonsense. Although I will say I did think one of Pleakly's outfits where he had like the flower on his chest was kind of a cute little compromise to me. But I do of course appreciate that the original Pleakly was a cross-dresser and it wasn't as politicized back then, although it was iconic of the character, and so it's a shame to have lost that characteristic from him in this version. But even aside from that, I just didn't love the way that these characters were actualized in this live action remake. I thought Billy Magnussen and Zach Galifianakis were okay in their roles, especially Billy Magnussen. Like, he fit Pleakly pretty well. Zach Galifianakis was okay as Jumba in human form, but his voice when he was his like true alien form was very off-putting to me. Original Jumba has this like vaguely Eastern European or even Middle Eastern accent, and that was really like missed in this version. I'm sorry, but hearing Zach Galifianakis's voice coming out of CGI Jumba's body was just so unnerving. Another X, another hell no, go back to the drawing board. I need that accent. I need that vaguely ethnic accent coming out of Jumba's mouth. And also, because of one of the other changes that they made to this story, they actually mischaracterized Jumba in this version, because he is far more evil and far more devious than he ever was in the original Lilo and Stitch. In the original, Jumba is, you know, a mad scientist, and he did create Stitch to be a weapon of mass destruction. A weapon of mass destruction, but he's not like evil. Like, he was kind of a bad guy, but he's not like super evil. But he had to become the out and out antagonist in this live action version because they got rid of one of the most iconic characters in the Lilo and Stitch universe, and that is Captain Gantu, who is the councilwoman's second hand, and he was originally the more kind of vicious and mean character in the Lilo and Stitch franchise. So the fact that they got rid of that character meant that they had to adapt one of the remaining characters to be the antagonist, and they chose Jumba, who, again, he's always been a mad scientist. Like, I'm not denying that. I'm not denying that, but like, he was just so mean here. Like, he was so cruel, and to make matters worse, he was cruel for cruelty's sake, because he doesn't actually have any concrete plans or motives with Stitch. Like, he eventually manages to kidnap the poor alien experiment, but again, his motives aren't very well written or explored here, and so he's just kind of like vaguely a mad evil scientist who doesn't really have a reason for what he's doing. It doesn't really land as well, and the absence of Captain Gantu is definitely felt. And unfortunately, as much of a fan I am of Courtney B. Vance, I think his Cobra Bubbles was also pretty underwhelming. I don't know how they managed to fumble these iconic Lilo and Stitch characters, especially considering that this film's runtime is longer than that of the animated version. The animated version was about 85 minutes long, and this is 108 minutes, so they had more time, but they did less with it. How did that how did they manage to do that? It really is quite bizarre and quite weird. Although, to be fair, I did grow up watching not only the original Lilo and Stitch movie, but also all of its sequels and also the TV series, so maybe that's where my attachment to some of these side characters comes from. But still, I was pretty disappointed with what they did with a longer runtime, considering the richness of the material that they had to work from. And that's not just with the characters, that goes for the story overall, which at times times felt like it was just a sort of quick rundown of the highlights of the original film. It lacked a lot of the depth and richness in culture that the original film conveyed so well, not just with the Hawaiian culture, but also with Lilo and Stitch's love of Elvis music, which is very controversial, but still, that's very watered down in this version. A lot of that kind of personality that was given to the characters and also the world is very much watered down here in favor of just playing the hits of the original film, which again is pretty confusing considering that the runtime for this one is longer than that of the animated version. And speaking of richness in culture, that was also missing from the visuals of this film, which largely felt like a Disney Plus movie, I'm sorry to say. Considering the fact that this film is set in Hawaii, one of the most beautiful places on the planet, you wouldn't know it. You wouldn't know it looking at this movie because it all felt very grey and desaturated. Even the Hawaiian sea just looked a little bit dull and boring. And again, in the animated version, the colours are so vibrant and they're so bright and rich, and a lot of that is just lost here. And you could try to argue that this is a live action version, it's supposed to look realistic, blah 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 blah, but first of all, this is a story about aliens, so like hold your horses there with your realism. And second of all, as much as we had issues with Snow White, as many problems as we had with Snow White, one critique that we can't throw in that film's direction is lack of colour, because Snow White was very, very colourful, and that was also a live action remake, so there's really no excuse for why Lilo and Stitch looks so dull and so TV movie-esque. But listen, I don't want to sit here and go on and on about all of the negatives of this movie, because ultimately I had a fun time with this one. You wouldn't know it from this review, but I did have a decent time with this live action remake. Is it one of my favourites? Absolutely not. And in fact, I do have a tier list of Disney live action remakes, which I'm going to update right now. I'm going to put Lilo and Stitch up on the board. And so yeah, it's definitely not one of my favorites of Disney's live action remakes, but it's definitely one that I enjoyed, especially because the original story, it was just so well written. It's such a beautiful story about friendship and found family, and so they really would have had to do a lot wrong for me to not like it. And as I said, another thing that this film absolutely got right was the friendship between Lilo and Stitch. I think the character of Stitch was done perfectly well. I think it's because they knew that the stakes were so high, considering that Stitch is one of the most merchandised characters outside of the Disney princesses and Frozen ever. And so they knew they could not go wrong with the character of Stitch, so they absolutely did him justice, and having Chris Saunders return to voice the character was perfection. But the stuff surrounding the two is where the issues lie, and that was a bit of a shame because it stopped this remake from being one of the very best that Disney has come out with. But at least it's better than Snow White, right? Like at least it's like a million times better than Snow White. And so with all of that being said, I'm going to be giving Lilo and Stitch a 7 out of 10. So that's it from me, guys. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on Lilo and Stitch, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this movie down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch your videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.